I would like to call tonight's meeting to order. Can folks hear me okay? Okay. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for, I would like to call tonight's meeting to order. Can folks hear me? Okay. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for being here. My name is Andrea Salwin-Copel. I am the Executive Director of National Council of Jewish Women New York, and I am sitting in tonight as acting chair just for this hearing. Our co-chair, Arva Rice, president and CEO of the New York Urban League, is held up, I believe, on her way. So we'll see if she makes it, and I will sit in her seat until she arrives. I want to thank Karen Seymour and Waldo Chavez at the Mind Builders Creative Arts Center for hosting us this evening in this lovely place. I want to mention that the center offers a variety of programs, including free pre-K, dance classes in various disciplines for multiple age groups, martial arts, among many other options. And if anyone would like further information, please reach out to the center's staff. Thank you very much. Tonight, we will continue our final round of public hearings taking place in all 5 boroughs. These hearings have furthered our efforts to solicit proposals from policy experts and the public on substantial, effective amendments to the city charter. The charter is our city's foundational document because the charter plays a vital role in establishing the structure and procedures of city government. It shapes how decisions are made on a wide range of issues affecting everyday New Yorkers. This commission has been impaneled to conduct a thorough review of the charter and to craft proposals to be put before the voters. This is our chance to create a better functioning city, one that is more transparent in its activities and more accountable to the people. It is an opportunity to make changes to ensure our city is less vulnerable to manipulation, corruption, or fraud. I know that all of my colleagues take this responsibility very seriously. While this commission was convened by local law passed by the City Council, we are an independent body. Regardless of the merits, any proposal that can be achieved by local law will likely not be up for our consideration. The commission will not consider any proposals that weaken local democracy or New Yorkers' rights. Following our second round of hearings, the commission staff produced an updated set of recommendations for the commission. These recommendations focus on 3 policy areas: government accountability, budget transparency, and land use. Our final round of hearings also concentrates on these areas, with each hearing covering one area. Our meeting yesterday in Staten Island focused on government accountability. Tonight, we will hear testimony on budget transparency. Some final notes on the process. We are not the only commission reviewing the charter. This commission is distinct from the Charter Revision Commission convened by the mayor. Both commissions are working simultaneously but separately. Last week, the New York State Assembly and Senate passed legislation that would prevent mayoral proposals from bumping any other charter amendments from the ballot. Pending the governor's signature, our proposals could appear on the November ballot alongside the mayor's commission's proposals. Harry Isaiah Black is joining us today as counsel. I'd like to ask the other members of the commission here tonight to briefly introduce themselves, and maybe we'll start, Manny, over here with you.
I am Manny Pastrich, and I have the honor of being appointed by the Speaker, Adrian Adams.
Rahul Agarwal, appointed by Mayor Eric Adams.
Alan Swisher, appointed by Queensborough President Donovan Richards.
Welcome to the Bronx again. Robert Miraglia, proud to be appointed by Bronx Borough President Vanessa Gibson. And just a quick shout out to mine, this beautiful host tonight, because they're a lifeline to the community, Mind Builders, one of our absolute faves. They do a ton of fun things here, and we're crazy about them. So thank you.
And maybe we'll go now to our folks on Zoom. Serena.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Sorry not to be there in person. My name is Serena Longley, and I'm honored to be appointed by the New York City Council Speaker, Adrian Adams. Thank you.
And Dr. Raj. And you are still on mute.
Can somebody unmute me? Okay, now it's unmuted. Okay. Dr. Ram Raju, appointed by the Staten Island Borough President.
And we've also been joined by one more commissioner. Joanne, if you can introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm so sorry I'm late. It really was the MTA. Skipped my stop altogether. Joanne, you appointed by Speaker Adams.
And Joanne, in case you're confused, I'm sitting in for Arva because she's delayed.
It's crazy.
Oh, and one more commissioner on Zoom. Navardo, would you mind introducing yourself?
Oh, yeah, thank you. Sorry, I had some technical issues. Good evening, everyone. My name is Navardo Lopez. I was appointed by Speaker Adrian Adams.
Ready? Okay, thank you. We will now turn to the testimony portion of tonight's agenda, which will focus, as I mentioned, on budget transparency. As the commission staff indicated in its updated recommendations, there are a number of ways that New York's local democracy could be strengthened by improving budget transparency and accountability. This includes providing greater transparency into appropriations, spending, and revenue forecasting, clarifying when the mayor can halt spending approved by the city council, also known as impoundment, setting rules of the road for adding to and withdrawing from reserves, and finally, bringing greater transparency to the city's procurement rulemaking body. At nearly $115 billion annually, New York City's budget is bigger than those of 46 states. The city has come a long way from the financial crisis of the late 70s when it was near bankruptcy. Today, strong revenues fund services and debt payments, and the city no longer runs current account deficits. As a result, the city's bonds remain highly rated. Despite these improvements, our current fiscal framework has grown outdated. With a wide range of financial issues under consideration, the Commission is interested in hearing more tonight about how we can update the charter to better support the city's economic responsibilities to New Yorkers. Before hearing testimony, I remind those in attendance that this is a formal government proceeding and that decorum must always be observed. As such, audience members shall remain silent at all times. If you intend to testify today but have not yet registered to do so, we will accept registrations up to the first 30 minutes of tonight's hearing. The witness table is reserved for people who wish to testify. Video recording or photography is not allowed from the witness table. At tonight's hearing, we will ask folks to limit their testimony to 3 minutes. I will let you know when your time is up. While tonight's hearing focuses on budget transparency, we welcome any testimony on proposed revisions to the charter. I'm going to call witnesses up in panels. Commissioners are encouraged to ask questions based on the testimony given, but I ask that you hold your questions until each member of the panel has testified. Finally, I ask that our witnesses and commissioners speak directly into their mics so that our Zoom attendees can clearly hear you. I would like to call our first witness, Rahul Jain.
Hello. I start whenever I just want to lose my time. That's all.
Good to go. Do we have the timer started? Go.
All right. Co-Chair Garrido, Co-Chair Rice, and members of the Commission to Strengthen Local Democracy. Thank you for providing me with the opportunity to testify today. I'm here on behalf of New York State Comptroller Thomas P. DiNapoli, and my name is Rahul Jain, State Deputy Comptroller for the City of New York. I'll be here to discuss some efforts to improve New York City's fiscal governance, and in particular, the creation and content of a formalized reserve policy. Setting aside resources for unexpected fiscal challenges and controlling their use to ensure they are available when needed are fundamental components of sound fiscal policies and management strategy. Until 2020, legal constraints had prevented the city from utilizing the resources in a rainy day fund. The city effectively maintained a substantial budgetary cushion through other means, including prepaying future year expenses, a necessary practice that nevertheless has clouded actual spending in the presentation of the city's budget. But in early 2021, New York City officials established a rainy day fund, also known as the Revenue Stabilization Fund, which was authorized by changes in state law and the city charter. This move made available $499 million in resources that could be used for budget balance. In recognition of the added flexibility that this RDF provided the city, it also deposited $1.45 billion into the fund in fiscal year 2022, but it has not scheduled any additional deposits since then. As of June 30th, 2024, the RDF balance stood at $1.96 billion, virtually unchanged since 2022, and a much smaller share of total expenditures due to growth in the city's budget. The lack of additions to the fund are notable as the city has collected substantially more revenue than anticipated at budget adoption in each of the past 3 fiscal years, including the current fiscal year. A formal published reserve policy with common features would have almost certainly led to additional deposits into the fund during this period, all the more critical given the economic and fiscal uncertainty the city faces now. Some basic features of such a published policy would define the purpose of its rainy day fund, the target level of reserves, and how resources would be replenished after a drawdown. These steps would put New York City closer to peer cities, which have formal policies of this type and which have led to the accumulation of reserves over time as a share of budgeted spending. These levels are well exceed New York City's in terms of share. In 2021, Comptroller Napoli released a report called Strengthening New York City's Rainy Day Fund, which recommended such policies, and also compared the city's policies to those with 9 other of the largest U.S. cities. All 9 other cities had established a purpose of reserve policies and target achievement ranges. Most experienced positive operating results since then, and that have accumulated reserves since we did this report. For comparison, cities like San Antonio, Dallas, and San Jose reported unrestricted fund balance as a share of general operating expenses that exceeded 20% of the expenses, multiples higher than New York City's rate. Even including substantial other budgetary cushions I mentioned earlier, such as the contingency line items the city uses, as well as other post-employment benefits trust that's existed since the late 2000s. The budgetary cushion totals about 7.4% of total expenditures entering fiscal 26, well below comparative levels. Our review found that other large cities typically publish a statement of the reserve policy on their websites, define the purpose of the unrestricted general fund reserves, including each account if they break it into accounts. Some people do emergency, contingency, climate related. Define the total amount of reserves to be set aside and the methodology used to determine if they're adequate. Make annual deposits required until the policy target level is achieved, which creates fiscal certainty in terms of the amount to be deposited each year. Provide a strong legislative check on the drawdown of emergency reserves. They can't pull the money out for no reason, and require replenishment of all resources drawn down from the reserves as soon as possible. Recent reviews by credit rating agencies suggest that governments that develop and maintain robust fiscal reserve policies may receive improved ratings based on stronger fund balance, cash reserves, and financial management policy, which would lower the cost of borrowing. This can lead to further budgetary savings for the cost of servicing debt. Comptroller Napoli recommends now, as he did in 2021, that the city take action to strengthen its reserve management. This should include defining the purposes of the rainy day fund, the conditions for withdrawal, and the order in which accounts would be drawn, and earmarking a portion of reserves for emergencies. Establishing targets for the amount of money to be set aside in the fund and setting forth a mechanism for determining the annual deposits. Modifying state law and the city charter as needed to require annual deposits into the fund until targets are met. Requiring the mayor to provide clear rationale for any amount withdrawn and requiring additional legislative approval to withdraw resources from any emergency accounts, and adding a provision which requires the amounts drawn down to be replenished as soon as possible. Some cities also have a policy to gradually increase their reserves by intercepting a portion of excess revenues compared to what they budget that they generate during periods of economic expansion. As noted earlier, the city has generated substantially more revenue than anticipated in recent years compared to projections, but has not put additional money aside in the last 3 years. This has left both annual contingencies and the RDF levels at a smaller share of expenses over time than they were 3 years ago. This choice suggests that a formal reserve policy, which requires a portion of the fund to be set aside, would have increased the amount of reserves at this time. While the RDF should not be and cannot be sufficient to plug recurring changes to federal and state funding sources, it may be used as part of a comprehensive plan to manage short-term uncertainty without impacting core services should those risks arise. Given the recent unpredictability of federal fiscal and economic policy choices, the city should be preparing for scenarios where all of its resources, federal, state, and locally funded, may be impacted. Finally, the commission staff also requested our views on under-budgeting of expenses. Comptroller Napoli issues several reports each year in response to the city's financial plan, including a report this month. They indicate that the city has consistently under budgeted for certain expenses, including in recent years, social services such as public assistance, as well as rental assistance, education spending, subsidies to the MTA, other state mandated costs, and overtime. This under budgeting reduces transparency in the budget and creates spending risks that may ultimately require the diversion of other resources. Public deserves transparency regarding these costs, and efforts to improve the rationale behind spending projections that are not in line with historical trends are warranted. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you. Questions for this witness?
So I have two sort of unrelated questions. I guess the first, as always, the comptroller has good financial advice, and I think everything you said made a lot of sense. And I guess my question is the first one is related two parts. One is like, is this something the city council could pass? Does it have to be done in the charter? And the related question is this just good policy advice and that everyone should follow? And if you don't, you pay a political price. And if you do, you have you'll be rewarded. So like, why does it need to be in the charter versus I follow your good advice or I don't follow your good advice?
So the policy itself does not need to be in city charter. There are many municipalities across the state and the country that have reserve policies that are formal, that are provided by the administration, and then they follow them. Now, I will say, I mentioned rating agencies look into the use of if you're not following the policy, you're not going to get credit for having the policy. And if the policy is sort of backed by the legislative body as well, in addition to the administration, that can also lend some heft to the power of the policy and whether or not you'll actually follow it in times of need. Because it's easy to do this stuff when things are easy. It's hard to do it when things are hard. I think that's what we find. In terms of I won't go into the politics necessarily of having one versus not having one. I think what a reserve policy does, though, is that when things are good, there can be a push to add new services, and that's the prerogative of the administration and in tandem with the legislature. But by having a policy which everybody agrees to, it allows for, in good times or bad, a recognition of, okay, this is our baseline for what we want to do. And we can do something above that, right? But we are going to commit to that baseline in terms of maybe adding certain amount of funds each year, right? Or even withdrawing the funds, right? There might be a reason to withdraw funds that is not an emergency. And so if you don't have something that's saying why you can withdraw funds, you can pull it out for any reason. As of right now, the administration has the ability to pull out 50% of what's in the fund right now. So I think what it does is it maybe makes smaller the box from which you would your fiscal options might be, but by doing so, it actually increases your options in bad times.
And I guess my second question is, you didn't actually say what a goal should be, and I assume, given the thoughtfulness of your testimony, you did that for a reason. And my second part of that question is, why not? Like, why should the money go into a rainy day fund instead of returning it to the taxpayers? Like, why should the city be a bank as opposed to a lower tax place?
So I think that's a great question. And what we saw when we did the comparisons was, and this is why we don't put a number out there. I think people have put very thoughtful ideas into what numbers out there, including council itself. The city controller's office has done this kind of work. I think IBO may have put something out. There are all types of ways you can do this. The reason we didn't do this is because we're less concerned from our vantage point of you should put 15% away or 10% away. I think reasonable people can have arguments about that. But the idea is that you want to agree on what you're putting money away for. And so when you said the thing about giving the money back, there are some in here, maybe San Antonio, I'd have to be sure, but where they put some of the money in, it's kind of a waterfall where you put it into an emergency fund. Then the next fund is a fund which is like for like a big projects fund, like a capital projects fund. And then there's another one that's a tax, sort of property tax relief fund. And that property tax relief fund, in your case, I think would actually do what you're saying, reduce the property taxes in the city in this case. And that's really a question, I think, that is for the legislature to negotiate with the administration, right? And so we didn't want to put a target out there for that exact reason. I think there needs to be some thought as to why we're doing this, but having the policy itself, that's good fiscal management.
Thanks for coming over here. On the other piece of your testimony, which was under budgeting,
Yep.
I guess in the same vein as the prior commissioner's question with respect to the charter, so I take your point that from your perspective, there's under budgeting on particular expenses. Is there a fix that's non-legislative? In other words, some sort of structural charter fix that you would suggest we're adopting with respect to that issue, or is that again like the rainy day fund, something that policy wise is good for us to know about, but really is something that should be addressed by the policymakers?
I would say that the budgeting piece can be done directly by the administration itself. The only change that really needs to happen is that, in this case, the Office of Management and Budget would come out and say, this is why we're either fully budgeting for something, which we've seen some of this year in the last few, and we actually see every year because over time, actually, I use overtime as an example. So if you see overtime, we have a budget that starts each year. And then every year, and everybody knows this, the number goes up. And by the end of the year, because we paid out all the overtime, we get to what the eventual number is. And we don't really do a lot of sophisticated, we can, but we don't do a lot of sophisticated analysis in terms of where will overtime go and what are the factors that might lead into that. We simply take a trend of the last few years and say, we're unlikely to go backwards unless there's a reason why we think overtime might come down, right? And so we're not seeing that reason. We're not seeing that rationale. If OMB were to provide that, or if any of the uniform services that actually have the overtime expense were to say, this is how we're going to reduce this cost, then I think it becomes totally reasonable that overtime could be projected as down. But we're not seeing that rationale. And so the numbers don't really make sense in terms of the projection, right? So I think absolutely this is something that doesn't necessarily need a charter fix. This is something that can be done by OMB itself in terms of what it puts into the budget.
Thanks.
Yep. Yes.
I'm going to ask a very simplistic question. We heard from City Council Finance that sometimes the challenge with the budget is that they don't really know what the revenues are, or they find out what the revenues are much later after the budget is done. And so this is why we have all those constant adjustments. So I'm just trying to understand, I understand your proposal. I'm trying to understand the mechanism of do you take it off the top? Do you, what's the mechanism for determining this? When do you put money in? Because OMB sometimes they don't even give the council finance the right numbers. So I'm just wondering how that could work out. And the other question I have is, having studied peer cities where they do have this, can you give some examples of when they've drawn down some of the funding they've had?
Sure. Both good questions. I think for your first question is about, council mentioned that we don't necessarily have the revenue numbers. I think actually council finance has some sense of what it will be. There may be a disagreement as to whether what the administration is saying versus what they're thinking, but there's some sense of what it will be. But when you get to the end of a fiscal year, right, you have to close your books. You do an annual financial statement, right? And that financial statement actually says exactly what came in and what went out. And as part of that process, we come to terms with, okay, what did you have last year? And some of these places, they don't actually put it at the beginning of the year. They may put it in at the end of the year after the books are closed to say, look, the results are, we had $500 million more than we expected. Our policy says we set aside 25% of that, and now $125 million goes into the fund. So that again goes down to how you want to structure this. And I think, again, that's a negotiation between legislative body and the administration. But at the end of the day, there are multiple ways where you can either agree early, right? I think you guys have discuss something about consensus that's agreeing early, or you pull it late and you do it after the results are in. But the mechanism is really based on which approach you can agree to, that, hey, these are the set of facts we're working with. And based on those set of facts, we should put aside a certain amount of that money until we have the bank sort of filled up. So that was your first question. Okay. Your second question was on, sorry. Peer cities. Okay. So the most common and generally written into the policy itself is a recession. So, and usually even the recession it can either be agreed on, right, by the legislative body and the administration, or it can be an actual, national GDP dropped 2 quarters in a row. Different places have different options, but recession is a very common one because the expectation is we will recover, right? And that this period of time for the recession is only going to be a year, 2, might have an impact for that time. You use the reserves to sort of fill in that gap, right? Keep things steady instead of having them drop and then having to go back to providing the services down the road, right? It's kind of a bridge, if you will. And that allows for providing the services as the economy recovers, right? And sometimes to help the economy recover, right? The other option is often emergencies, and I think that one is very interesting right now. We are seeing changes to the federal sort of approach to managing emergencies, like say FEMA. We're talking a lot about FEMA lately. It is fairly common for some of these policies to have something saying, okay, if there's an emergency of this type, and it's usually agreed to. It's not saying, okay, there's going to be a hurricane or tornado or something. There's some agreed to event, and that event says, okay, it's a trigger. We will allow you to use and withdraw from the fund. So those are two common reasons.
Just a final question.
Sure.
Where do you see the comptroller? What's the role of the New York City comptroller in all of this? Because, there's City Council Finance, there's OMB, and then there's a comptroller's office. So how does this work with the 3 of them?
I think 2 things. One, I think the city comptroller provides a lot of detail as to, what are the sort of mechanisms or what are the factors in play that would be good policy, right? So I think I recommend looking through what they've done, because the city comptroller's office has done actually a few things depending on who's city comptroller. But it's usually on, hey, a reserve policy is good. They kind of agree there. Now what the target should be and all that, and that changes, but I recommend using them as a resource. That's probably the easiest thing. On another level, you can add more bells and whistles if you want. You can go to the comptroller and ask for them for sort of an independent evaluation of things. That's another way to do it. I know that at the state level, right, we do have revenue consensus, and the state comptroller does speak at that conversation, right? So you can bring them in as hopefully a sort of independent, nonpartisan a piece of the conversation, right? And then that helps inform what the policy will be, or what even the deposit might be, depending on how you frame the policy. So I would lean on the city comptroller's office for their expertise. That's probably where the focus should be. But you can use them in all different types of ways. Yeah.
Go ahead.
Thank you again for coming
Yeah, of
tonight.
course.
Could you give a very surface explanation of why a credit rating is important for a city?
Sure. So the easiest way to put this is if everybody here, I assume has consumer loans, house loans, auto loans, whatever it is, okay? And when you go in, one of the basic things they do is they run a credit check, right? And so if your credit is 450, you're going to pay a much higher rate. Your risk of paying that loan back is going to be higher than somebody whose credit score is 800, let's say, right? That is the same idea behind a credit rating, that you are going out there and saying, in this case, to the market, we are usually double A plus, even AAA credit here in New York City, depending on which of the credits you use. We won't get into that conversation, but it's quite high, right? And if that were to deteriorate, if that were to weaken, we're going to pay higher interest rates on the debt. And that's not something actually that we're not used to. It's been a long time since we've been there, but actually we had back in 75 when all this happened, the kind of explosion was when we could not issue debt because the credit rating agency says we can't rate this as investment grade anymore. And that was kind of okay, now we have a real problem because nobody's going to buy the paper. So, we're well away from that. We have so many bells and whistles now. We really are a much stronger city financially, economically, management policies wise. But you can still see the ratings slip, right? And we've seen ratings slip in the last few years for other places. And what it does, it ends up pressuring your ability to issue capital. And New York City, the vast majority of capital spending we do in the city is funded by debt. So if we're going to continue to make those capital investments, you want to be able to make them in an efficient manner, and that means having a higher credit rating.
Yeah, thank you. I wanted to go back to, you were speaking earlier about how, at times the budget is reduced from the actual results of the previous year without explanation. So I wanted to ask specifically if you think it might be a good idea for the mayor to be required to provide a written explanation, for why a number is increasing or decreasing over the previous year in the budget.
Yeah. So I think, I think there's some care that should be taken because you want to have a proper threshold. If something was $2 million last year and, it's $1 this year, and there was some, bizarre sort of situation that led to that, there's only so much time, and OMB is just like any agency, there's a limited amount of capacity, right? But I think for recurring large under budgeted items, I think there really is maybe a role for pushing in a direction where that stuff needs to be accounted for in some way. Because often what's coming up now, even in hearings and testimony, is that, there's a suggestion that we'll review this in the future. And that it's an answer to your question, but it's not the fundament, does not answering the fundamentals. Why is this less than it was last year? And I think, again, when we're talking about budget transparency, you want to be honest about why something is down or not, right? Because eventually you're going to have to pay the bill if it comes. And a lot of these expenses are what we call mandated expenses, where the city really doesn't have a choice. If somebody comes and asks for the service, they have to give it, right? And so these costs are unlikely to go down because the city says we're not going to pay for them. That's not really a possibility, right? So it's sort of a hope and a wish. So I think when it gets to focusing on budget transparency, something that allows for a reasonable, right, a certain threshold, but it's some kind of rationale for why things are going down, or a discussion as to what maybe we need to fund this at the same level we have it now, right? That's another option, is to say, listen, I get you don't think it's going to go higher, right? But we've been seeing for the last 3 years or 5 years or whatever it is, it hasn't gone lower. We're going to book it at the average of the last 5 years. That's it. The next year can't be any lower than that, right? And so that reduces the games. So I think there's a lot of ways to respond to your question, but I think fundamentally the answer is some rationale or way to keep them at the same level so that the numbers aren't all out of whack is a good step forward.
Yeah, but also keeping that limited to, as you were saying, large and recurring, right, either under budgeting or over budgeting. Right. So at a certain threshold, the value starts to, it takes more than maybe it's giving. Yeah. Any questions from Zoom? No.
Great. Thank you so much.
Okay. So we're ready to call our next witness, Louise Chafee.
Hi, I'm here on Zoom. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Wonderful. Good evening, Acting Co-Chair Selwyn Coppell, Executive Director Castelli Michael, and members of the Commission. I'm Louisa Chafee, and I'm Director of the Independent Budget Office. I thank you for inviting me back to continue our conversation about these important issues. As you know, IBO is a nonpartisan, independent government agency mandated by the New York City Charter. My testimony today will focus on 3 areas. First, the need to strengthen cities' reserves. Second, the need to reform human service contracting. And finally, the importance of ensuring budget transparency. So let's start with protecting the framework for sound budgeting. In recent months, the challenges presented by federal policy and budgetary changes have grown exponentially. It's difficult for lawmakers to set aside funds that could be used for programs to address the needs of New Yorkers, especially when a mayoral administration is also spending more and saving less. For these reasons, IBO suggests that the charter should provide clear guidance on the importance of investing in the Revenue Stabilization Fund, commonly called the Rainy Day Fund. Specifically, language should be added to Section 258B, which currently describes the use of the Revenue Stabilization Fund where there is a deficit, and also sets a minimum of $100 million in general reserves. This section could also require an investment in the RSF in any fiscal year that has a surplus, perhaps as a percentage of the surplus. This new requirement could apply unless the mayor certifies that it is either unnecessary or unfeasible to add funds to the RSF. Next, cost-effective services and fairness to providers. IBO also has 3 recommendations to improve the procurement process. 1, ensuring timely registration and timely invoice payment for nonprofit vendors. 2, broadening the membership of the Procurement Policy Board, PPB. And 3, limiting the extended use of emergency contracts. Advances provide eventual relief to nonprofit providers after they've already endured having their contracts registered far too late. But if a contract hasn't been registered, the city is legally barred from paying that vendor. It cannot pay invoices and it cannot issue advances. For that reason, IBO recommends a charter amendment to require agencies to process contract extensions for active human service contracts that would otherwise expire, so as to prevent these payment lapses. The second problem is late payment on invoices. IBO supports a charter mandate to require agencies to pay 80% of every invoice submitted by a human service contractor in good standing within 30 or 60 days of its submission. This could be automated into the city's contract data systems, FMS and Passport. Expedited partial payment does not significantly increase risk to the city, as most of the invoices go to rent and payroll, 2 costs that are already vetted when the contract budgets are approved. And it is easy for the city to recoup from future invoices and or post-audit if, in fact, an error occurred. IBO also supports changes to the PPB. It should have to meet 4 times a year. Its membership should be enlarged, with limits set on the number of city employees who can be appointed and requirement for some members to come from the appropriate vendor arenas. Section 259D of the Charter, which defines the composition of the IBO's advisory committee, could serve as a model. Finally, the PPB should have its own director and staff and should produce an annual report. IBO's final procurement recommendation is for the charter limitations on the extended use of emergency contracts. Emergency contracts often result in high expenses. As seen with asylum seeker services, the city should move to more fiscally responsible and programmatically appropriate service delivery options sooner rather than later. And the mayor and the controller should have to renew their joint decision to use emergency procurement every 2 years after the original registration date to get to these goals. Lastly, enhancing the city budget to promote transparency. Finally, the looming federal policy changes and budget cuts threaten our city. As city decision makers wrestle with how to address these challenges, it's crucial for the public to be able to clearly track the budgets for all programs that serve New Yorkers. Units of appropriation, commonly known as UAs, are the units which define each spending category. Under the charter, each UA is supposed to be limited to a single, quote, program, purpose, activity, or institution, unquote, but this has never been done. Many agencies lump unrelated programs with unrelated funding streams into a single UA. This conveys little useful information to either the public or the city council. For example, DYCD combines after-school, adult literacy, and assistance to immigrants in a single UA. The police department has a single UA that totals nearly a quarter of the entire NYPD $6 billion budget. That UA contains precinct houses, detectives, and a number of other services, an enormous amount of the NYPD's business. Both of these agencies, along with others, will face cuts in federal funding. Failure to provide understandable UAs ultimately shortchanges public accountability. IBO suggests that the charter require UAs to be studied and updated on a regular basis, jointly by the mayor and the council. IBO also suggests that the charter prescribe a minimum number of UAs for each agency. IBO suggests a minimum of 4 or 5 UAs per agency. The charter could also set a maximum size for a UA in terms of a percentage, perhaps 1% of the overall city budget. This rule could be waived where the mayor and the council agree that a specific item is, in fact, indivisible. Under this sort of standard, for example, the NYPD would not be able to lump together all their police precincts, borough-wide offices, and various specialty units, but items like the city's debt service costs or employee health insurance could remain as a single UA. Thank you for the opportunity to testify, and I welcome any questions you may have.
Hi, thank you so much. I can go first. Thank you for your attention to this issue of overly broad UAs. In our report, the commission staff recommend clarifying the council's ability to modify or subdivide UAs, which would likely yield to smaller UAs and therefore an ability to more closely track programmatic spending. I want to just get your opinion on that change of adding the word subdivide to the council's ability and what you think of that, and or if you have maybe other text or language or proposals that might be better.
Right. Well, so thank you for the question. We are suggesting that the council and the mayoralty together would look at all UAs, because part of what happens is that programs age out or become less useful, and we think there's benefit to figure out what the right UA should be per year. So they may be subdivided, there may be new areas, there may be refinements, there may also be decisions. But we think if there's a comprehensive process, the entirety, not just the existing and changing the existing, would be allowed.
Okay, thank you. Manny?
I guess I want to stay on that UA. I mean, I guess what I heard you say was that currently the charter has some words that are in essence being ignored. And my fear is that we're going to add more words that could be ignored. I think some of your suggestions are interesting in terms of just having hard limits of how big it could be, which I think may be easier to guide. And so I guess that's my fear. And if you have any comments, and then I guess the second part of that question is how, in essence, could the city council, is it just a failure of the city council to insist on it before they approve the budget, to the changes of the UAs? If the city council wants smaller UAs or subdivided UAs, that they should just insist on it. And if they don't insist on it, the administration will continue to do what it's doing, no matter what words are in the charter.
So we will say that the charter police throughout the charter are remiss, that there are lots of areas of the charter where what's actually happening doesn't align with the spirit. We should also say that some agencies really do align with the spirit of the language. And so it's not every city agency, but some of the most difficult, or some of the agencies that are most out of practice, are also those where the public really needs the transparency. And so we think that the combination of changes to the charter, but also attention so that people understand what this process is and call for it, will help regular New Yorkers, members of the city council, other elected officials, people like you commissioners, have far better insight as to where monies really specifically granularly are. And we're particularly concerned because of the changes on the federal level, the fiscal changes, And in the current structure, it's extremely difficult to understand exactly where the federal money is being used, and thus it makes reductions in services that much more opaque.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Chasey.
Thank you so much for the opportunity to testify.
Okay. We're going to call our next witness. I'm sorry, I'm going to maybe butcher this name. 5 Mualimak. Mualimak. It's on Zoom. There we go.
Yes, thank you. How are you? That is my name, literally and legally. So 5 Mualim Ak. I am the Executive Director of Incarcerated Nation Network. I'm here representing a network of coalitions, including the Jails Action Coalition and the Young Adult Perspective Project. A lot of the work that we do at Incarcerated Nation Network is post-incarceration redirection. We do justice impact and supportive housing for young adults, mostly youth from Rikers Island. The testimony I want to give today is around key recommendations to strengthen the jail oversight through changes in New York City Charter. As we know, we cycle about 200,000 people through a year, about $500,000 per person for Rikers Island, and we've been doing that since 1650. The Board of Corrections must have an enhanced capacity, independence, authority to set, assess, and enforce minimum standards. The following recommendations aim to amend the city charter in ways that would accomplish that. Section A, of course, a few things. The board must have the capacity to assess compliance with minimum standards. The next section I want to jump on is the board must have enhanced independence to set, assess, and enforce minimum standards. And then, of course, the board must have the authority to enforce its minimum standards. The board shall be authorized to close facilities and fail to comply minimum standards, and the board shall be authorized to release people subject to inhumane treatment. So under the first section, let me say that set a minimum budget. The board must have the capacity to assess compliance with minimum standards. So set a minimum budget for the Board of Corrections, which must be at least 1% of the expense budget for the corrections. In context, this would increase the Board of Corrections staff from 33% at present to approximately 100. Board of Correction testifies in recent budget hearings that they need at least 60 staff to carry out their mandate. The CCRB's headcount is set at 67% of the NYPD, and the council members are currently advocating for that budget to be increased to 1% of NYPD through revisions of the New York City charter. There is also precedent for other New York City oversight agencies having an independent budget, like the Independent Budget Office. Also, oversight agencies across the country has noted previous charter revision recommendations from BOC members and staff. 2, the board and its members must carry out a minimum of set functions, including the board must and shall hold monthly hearings, monthly meetings, which include time for public comment related to jail conditions. I should know, I started that like about a decade or two ago. All board members in the board must tour the jail at least quarterly. At least 2 members of the board must tour the jail upon the death of an incarcerated person. As we know, we've had multiple deaths with no visits. Quarterly tours must include mental health housing and any restrictive housing. C, the board must and shall convene on a semi-annual basis representatives of board district, defense organizations, and justice and the criminal justice Supreme Courts to present report on current jail conditions, including but not limited to compliance with minimum standards. And then in context, just all of these things, because I'm running out of time, there are currently no requirements for the board members or staff to carry out these specific outlined duties. And there's still specific duties, like the board and staff is also required by the board shall invite on semi-annual basis criminal court justices to tour the jail, accompanied by board members and the board staff. As part of the evaluation and departmental performance, the board will submit an annual inspection report about each departmental facility itemizing its compliance with all minimum standards. Just to be a little context to you, I've been doing this work for over a decade. I've done all of the movies, documentaries, TV reports, college reports on these issues, and none of this is being adhered to right now. And so we need to at least get ourselves in compliance, in which we're sort of wasting funds with the city, and actually work on solutions to strengthen the board, but also allow them to have the oversight to hold the jail responsible. We have more city deaths in this jail than anywhere on the planet Earth. I'm just going to be honest with you. We have the world's largest jail, and we're the most irresponsible with it. The board chair should board be appointed by the mayor and the city council. In context, the chair is currently only appointed by the mayor, which sort of makes it a hypocrisy. It should be appointed by the people. The board, and I know this because I assassinated the entire board of correctors at one time and appointed everybody who's there and then recommissioned them years later. This was 10 years ago. The board shall establish such committees as it deems necessary. The board cannot even do that, yet it represents millions of New Yorkers that we spend billions of dollars in. The board shall appoint members of each committee, taking into account the preferences and expertise of the board members, and shall designate one committee member as a chair. Board committees cannot be dissolved and their members removed without a majority vote of the board. 2, another recommendation, the board shall appoint an executive director, taking into account diverse needs of this organization, who can only be hired to remove the majority vote of the board after hearing and funding good cause. Right now, a member of the board cannot be the executive director. And let me just put this in real context. I was wrongfully convicted for 12 years until the Innocence Project basically let me out. I was locked up 10 years. They said, you know what, 5, you know how you're innocent. You talk about you ain't do nothing. All the cops are guilty. Turns out you're right. Here's $40 as a bus ticket. Good luck. The Innocence Project is here. Good luck. I've been kind of doing this work since then. I wrote the HALT bill. I'm one of the founding members of the HALT Solitary Confinement Act. I wrote 940 pieces of legislation over 42 states in the last 12 years. So I very much so know what I'm talking about. I worked with every commissioner and every administration of mayorals since Bloomberg, since Doris Schur was running Rikers, right? And so when the board does not have the power, when I was incarcerated at Rikers, we had guards allowing young adults, juveniles, to have cage fights. Don't get me wrong, I've years later got them all indicted, locked up all 23 officers, and handled that through the Lightfoot case. But this was something that I pleaded to the Board of Corrections as a person incarcerated to handle. It was never done because they do not have the capacity to be able to administer justice. One of my clients, Khalif Browder, lived on Rikers for 3 years. I'm sure you've seen the movie. I did it with the Weinsteins. Horrible person, but great film. That case wouldn't have happened if the board had the ability to investigate his complaints. By the time the investigation came up, it was 3 years later, he already committed suicide and the city was facing millions of dollars in reparations. And so these suggestions, like the board must have the authority to enforce minimum standards. I'm not sure if you understand what minimum standards is. Minimum standards is because Rikers is a county jail. Yes, it's the world's largest county jail. Yes, it's 400 acres of a county jail, but it's based on the simple rules of a county jail. And so when you service 200,000 people per year and you're cycling paying about $500,000 per person, you can't service one person right. That average county jail time stay is 3 years. And so we're giving minimum standards, which means just enough minimum standards for you to stay alive. Does anybody know what the minimum amount of food is to stay alive? The minimum amount of sunlight you need to stay alive? The minimum amount of recreation outside, right? So these are what the jail runs on, yet the board cannot make those changes. It's like we have a puppet board that does nothing and have no real enforcement, but lives are dying every day, just to be respectful. The board shall be authorized to release people subjected to inhumane treatment. We have people who have died on Rikers Island because the board has made petitions for them to release, but does not have the power to help anybody. And so these recommendations are not only to improve our city, improve safety, improve oversight, and save lives, and also countless millions upon what we pay in the city with defamation lawsuits, but also accountability for lives itself. And so I thank you for your time in this hearing today, and I openly welcome any questions.
Thank you so much. That was a lot. I have a couple of questions, but I want to let others chime in first if anyone would like to.
I'll ask a quick question if that's okay from online.
Yes, please go ahead.
Sure. Thank you so much for the testimony. There was a lot there. I wanted to distill one little piece of it. You mentioned that it's your view that the minimum standards are not being adhered to, and wondering if it's fair to say that you think that's because of a lack of funding, or do you think there's more to it than that?
No, it's not a lack of funding. We spend more than most cities do in our city jail. We spend billions there. So it's not the amount of
Sorry, wait, I mean lack of funding of the Board of Corrections, sorry.
Oh, definitely. We have a board that's not even represented to the population it serves. So it's like you can have a board of like 4 members that represent millions. Like that's not operational. And then the way the charter is structured is that it should be at least represented to the population ratio, at least somewhat, right? Or at least mimic some of the other city institutions which are in relation to the population, like the NYPD. And so the board needs at least 60 members to carry out its duties, but they don't even have that capacity. So they're working in a minus 100% of the time. Yet we expect for them to do their job 100%, right? And they're responsible for lives, the maintenance, and sad to say, mental health, welfare, because we don't have any systems yet, and the custodial care of people who are in prison there and just detained. Everyone there is just detained, right? So not only that, but the ability to close facilities and to fail to comply with minimum standards. So when the Department of Corrections does not comply, the board has no power to penalize them. When they ask them for information, the Department of Corrections can say, oh, we'll give it to you, and never give it to them. They don't have the power to authorize. They're just oversight without any sort of teeth in some sense. And so, yes, it is about funding. It is about staffing. It is about changing the laws so that they can have the ability to impact positively. So the board shall have and shall exercise the authority to close any jail facility or unit which does not meet the board's minimum standards, which means we shouldn't be. If the standards are just minimum for you to stay alive, then anything below that means that people don't have the minimum standards to stay alive, in which unsafe, unsanitary, and inadequate to provide the safety, healthy, and well-being of programming for people in custody required by law or the board's rules, or which consistently fail to adhere and comply by the board's rules, regulations, or recommendations. Upon a finding that a jail facility, because remember, Rikers is 11 jails, it's a huge island. Upon finding that a jail facility or unit meets these criteria, or finding that a reasonable foreseeable risk that failing to close a jail facility or unit that will cause significant harm or death to an incarcerated person, the board shall direct the closure of this facility. In context, the State Commission on Correction has parallel powers related to enforcing minimum standards. So it's the same thing we're asking for the city to have. And actually, it would save lives.
Thank you. Forgive me if you address this. I think funding for the board would be a major issue for the Board of Corrections. Did you recommend any particular amount or formula for, I would assume that you support a guaranteed minimum funding for the Board of Corrections, but which I think you did say, but I'm not sure if you said a formula or an amount or how that might amount of the city budget, percentage of the Department of Corrections budget. If you mentioned, I want to dig into that a little bit and get your thoughts.
Yes, no problem. I could read that for you right now. Just have it.
I missed it. Yeah.
It's okay. And so the board shall consist of 9 members appointed as follows: 3 by the mayor, 3 by the city council, 1 by the public advocate, 1 by the controller, and 1 appointed by a rotating basis on the longest serving borough president. The board shall include at least 2 people who have been detained at DOC facilities and at least 1 person who's immediately family member or has been detained currently by DOC facilities. And then the board chair, I'm sorry, let me get into the part. Sorry, yes. So to set a minimum budget for the Board of Corrections, which at least 1% of the expense budget for the Department of Corrections. It's 1%. In context, this would increase the Board of Corrections staff from 33 at present to approximately 100. The Board of Corrections testified in a recent hearing themselves, in a budget hearing, that they need at least 60 staff to carry out their mandate. And so basically, we're not giving them the power to at least complete their mandate. And we already know that they're overwhelmed with their mandate and their duties. And so the CCRB's headcount is set at 67% of the NYPD, and council members are currently advocating that this budget should be increased by 1% of NYPD through revisions of the city charter.
Thank you. And Serena, go ahead.
Just a quick follow-up on that. So if they currently have around 30 employees and they can't meet their minimum mandate, and they've testified, and it seems like you're agreeing they need around 60 to complete their mandate, what's the justification for the additional 40? staff members that would be covered if we had the 1%?
So they
Yeah, go
so
ahead.
they can out and carry out their minimum set of functions. They're not even doing, what's needed. They need to carry out at least their minimum set of functions. And so with their maximum amount of staff, the board shall be able to hold monthly meetings and comment to jail conditions and sort of the standards that I listed out. They're not even doing all of that. They're in default for all of these. So in other words, we have a board that doesn't have enough funding, doesn't have staff, that cannot complete its own mandated duties.
So would they be able to do that though with the 60 or so employees?
Yes. And that's what I included, everything that they will be able to do. Like if requested, shall invite semi-on-basis criminal court justices to the jail to do all of their preview. They're not able to do it. And so what happens, I'm just going to be honest with you. I've been doing this work for a long time. I've launched like 20-something organizations in New York that do a lot of advocacy. And when you don't allow the board to do what they have to do, it's sort of wasting the advocate's time, right? Because then you have activists going after the board, and the board's like, we never have the power to do it. So it becomes this sort of argument of, we don't have the money to do it. I don't have enough people to do all of this. Meanwhile, the advocates are saying, we have to stay on top of you to do your job because it's mandated for you. The state mandates for state facilities, you're for the city facilities. There's no one else to go to. And we have this carte blanche from the mayor who has the ability to appoint, which we need to change to get the power to the board.
Thank you.
Thank you. And so by strengthening this and supporting this, I'm just asking that there be some details. And I know that this is a lot in the public eye and also a lot because, I mean, we've done a lot of activism on it, but this is something that affects so many New Yorkers. And with ICE now returning to Rikers Island in the correctional facility, this is going to be just a launch pad. And I'm not sure if anybody knows the origin of Rikers Island. Rikers Island was owned by a slave catcher when the North and America and New York said, you can come to New York and be free. Alexander Riker was catching Black and Latino people and selling them back to slavery. So its history is horrid. Number two, I did the report with Columbia University. Rikers was built in 1650. This is the first jail. This is our first jail. And so we need to actually take a responsibility in changing that. So when you talk about fixing up Rikers, you can't fix plumbing from the 1600s. You can't fix problems, electrical problems. You can't fix structural problems that's built so old. I've sat in there and walked down the hallway and seen the whole ceiling fall and just kill somebody. Like, it is impossible, and it's a toxic environment. And any given day, you'll see correctional officers outside rallying, talking about they don't need to work there because it's a dangerous environment. And then the very next day, you'll see people who have been there rallying, talking about it's a danger. Nobody wants to be there. And so we need to also address this in a manner that the board should have at least oversight to them. We do have new facilities. We're not taking the old methods of not addressing issues into new facilities. So thank you for your time and your consideration.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And even though you spoke very quickly, I want to assure you that your entire written testimony will be, part of the record. So it will all be carefully considered. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I think we have our last witness, Zara Nasir.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for the chance to speak today. So my name is Zara. I'm with the People's Plan, which is part of the People's Budget Campaign. Our coalition is fighting for city budgets that invest in care, not cuts. We believe everyone deserves the basics to live and thrive, and our budgets should reflect that. As you know, in recent years, even as New Yorkers' needs have grown and costs have gone up, we haven't been able to fight for the investments our communities deserve. Instead, we've had to fight to stop this current mayor from slashing funding. We've won some restorations, but the city should never have to cut libraries, CUNY, 3K, schools, and basic services when there is no financial need to do so in the first place. The last few years have exposed that our city budget process is undemocratic, it's confusing, and it gives way too much power to the mayor. So we're really glad that the council's Charter Revision Commission is looking for ways to fix it. We support real reforms to make the budget process more open, fair, and accountable. We support more transparency through stronger units of appropriation and budget function analysis. We support more balanced consensus revenue forecasting. We support closing loopholes to the budget modification process. that let the mayor make unilateral changes throughout the year. But today I want to focus on one of the most important reforms you're considering, which is reining in the mayor's impoundment power. There must be real checks and balances to this power. No mayor should be able to block funding or to punish non-mayoral agencies for potentially political reasons. For the last few years, Eric Adams has used the mayor's budget powers to impose deep cuts to essential services. This was despite widespread opposition from the public, elected officials, and city council members, and repeated testimony from various other fiscal entities in the city that there was no financial need to do so. The council could have amended or passed its own budget with more funding for services, but the threat of impoundment makes it hard for the council to consider enacting a real alternative to the mayor's budget. After all, what's the point if the mayor can pull a Giuliani-style move like in the 1990s, in 1998 and specifically, and threaten to impound funds? The Charter Commission's updated staff report includes some important reforms to address this issue. We and the public and the city council need to be able to see how money is actually spent and hold the mayor accountable. That's why the proposal requiring the OMB, Office Budget of Management, to report on underspending and staffing levels is really important, and we support that. But we need stronger safeguards to protect independent agencies and check the mayor's power. We recommend clear and structural limits on the mayor's impoundment power. The mayor should only be able to use the power during financial emergencies and with the concurrence of independent fiscal authorities, including the council, comptroller, or the independent budget office. These changes would help ensure that no mayor can use funding decisions as political leverage or sideline the council as a co-equal branch of government. We appreciate your attention on this issue, and we urge you to go forward and go further. And just really encourage enforceable checks and balances so that the risk of executive overreach and mayors playing political games with our essential services is no longer a threat. And so, yeah, hope you take this opportunity to create more balanced, democratic, and accountable budget process for all New Yorkers. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Zara. Questions? And we do have one more witness after this. That shouldn't make a difference, but I just misspoke earlier. Thank you. Very important testimony. Thank you so much.
Thanks. There was a hand raised, but I don't know if that's
For what?
from Rain Riley.
Oh, I'm sorry. Did one of our commissioners raise their hand?
Oh, yeah. Well, because you had said before that there were no more witnesses, and I was like, no, I'm here. So we
Oh, okay. Okay. Sorry. Okay. Thanks.
Sorry, I worried you. I'm sorry. We're gonna do that right now.
Thank you.
Okay. So we're ready for our next and yes, final. We believe so. Rain Riley. Rain Riley.
Hi, yes. My name is Rain Riley. I live in Flushing, Queens. I think I've spoken to the council before. But I just wanted to touch on some issues that I'm hoping we could find a solution for. The biggest thing for me first is just disability funding. There's so much money going into the medical system. So much money going in. There's so much money going into the insurance systems, but I'm sure as you know, that money is not reaching all of the consumers, as well as me. And I've been up lobbying the last couple of weeks with Caring Majority Rising to try to get CDPAP reinstated, right? Because the PPL thing has been a whole disaster budget-wise as well. And actually last week, one of the members of Caring Majority Rising ended up passing away because her homemaid wasn't getting paid, ended up getting homeless and living in her car and couldn't go take care of her. And so like these are the things that are happening, and I don't really know what we can do charter-wise to fix it, but at the end of the day, for me, I think all of it comes down to having a better checks and balance of power. The mayor has absolutely devastated the city. He's completely just laundered everything he can. He's been adding more and more money to the police budget. And that's a big thing that I don't think we should be having more and more NYPD because they're not doing anything helpful. And I don't know what we can do to stop the increase of the funding of that because it's coming directly from social services that people need. So I don't know if that's part of the checks and balances we could do, if the mayor is the one who's increasing this mostly. But it's absolutely atrocious. And we don't even know where the money's going into until afterwards. And most of it's going into like settlement suits of, trying to deal with them attacking people. So that's really upsetting to me. I also wanted to talk about housing and the rent guideline board and how the mayor has too much power with that. So again, the checks and balances. I want to know where the money is going for NYCHA. All of the systems that I've been working with housing wise, NYCHA, with HRA, the voucher systems, there have been a lot of fraud, like a ton of fraud. And I know a lot of that's coming on the landlord side that they're committing the fraud. They've committed fraud with me so many times, lied about Section 8, used my HRA and lied about it, right? Like it's insane the things they're getting away with. And I'm not sure why the city is continually getting messed with and allowing this to happen. So I don't know who's overseeing that when it comes to that sort of housing funding that should be going to people, but instead the landlords are taking advantage of. So if we could find checks and balances for that. And then, of course, jail. Everything that the previous speakers have said. I want to also point out that New York was the first place in the US where our jails forced incarcerated people to work. So we're stealing money everywhere and the money's not going to people. And I really hope you can help us. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Thank you for your testimony. Any questions? Okay, thank you. Okay, we're just going to finish up with a couple of announcements. I want to remind everybody that our next hearings are scheduled. I'm going to read off 3 of them. Monday, June 23rd at the Museum of the City of New York in Manhattan, focusing on government accountability. Thursday, June 26th at Sunset Park Library in Brooklyn, focusing on land use. And Tuesday, July 1st at the Queens Public Library in Jamaica. As this is our final hearing, it will not focus on any area in particular. All hearings are from 5 to 7, and folks are invited to testify either in person or via Zoom. Registration and further details on all hearings are on our website at www.thecommission.nyc. I want to thank everyone who testified today, who watched online or in person, and the commission staff who organized this hearing. Are there any other questions or business from the commissioners before we adjourn? Okay. Yes, hearing none, there's a motion to adjourn. Is there a second? All in favor? Aye. Any opposed?